Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're excited to be with you and hear from these Washington County Senate candidates in the August 9 Democratic primary. Informed voters are essential to a healthy democracy. My name is Steve Pappas. I'm the editor and publisher of the Times-Argus. I'll be your moderator for this evening. Because our newspapers no longer endorse for local, state, and federal races, we support events like this in order to introduce the community to the candidates and the issues. This is a forum, not a debate, so the candidates will not be addressing one another directly. However, they will be discussing the influences and experiences that will provide context for their individual positions on a range of issues. This evening's event is being co-hosted by Vermont Conservation Voters and the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, or VPIRG. Vermont Conservation Voters is in its 40th year advocating for strong environmental laws, holding lawmakers accountable, and helping support candidates who share their vision and values. VCV believes that a bright future for Vermont includes working to advance and defend policies that protect the environment, promote health, foster social, racial, and economic justice, bolster strong communities, and strengthen our democracy. VPIRG's mission is to promote and protect the health of Vermont's people, environment, and locally based economy. For 50 years, the organization has been informing and mobilizing individuals in communities across this state. For many Vermonters, a visit from a VPIRG canvasser sharing important information about current events is a rite of summer. You might get one tonight during this event. We're so grateful to have 5 candidates with us tonight for what is certain to be a lively discussion about some of the biggest issues facing our state and nation, including the climate crisis, clean water, housing, and democracy. The questions for this evening's event came from VCV and VPIRG, as well as from audience members who submitted questions ahead of time. For each question, candidates will have 90 seconds each to speak. A timer will help keep track of how much time they have left for their answers. You in the audience, I don't believe, can see that, but the panelists can. Probably to the dismay of the panelists, I reserve the right to ask a follow-up question, moderator's prerogative. Hopefully that won't happen. I will ask the candidates the first question in alphabetical order by last name, as they appear on the ballot. By introduction, Ann Cummings, Jared Duval, Jeremy Hansen, Andrew Perchlik, and Ann Watson. So on that first question, that will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 respectively. And then we'll rotate, so it will be 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, and so on. If anyone gets confused, you don't have to worry, I'm going to be keeping track. As a note to avoid confusion, I will be referring to Ann Cummings and Ann Watson by their first and last names. At the end of our questions, each candidate will be given 90 seconds to make a closing statement. For everyone tonight, closed captioning is available at the bottom of your Zoom window. In addition, if you have comments that you want to share with all of today's attendees, the chat function is enabled. However, we ask that all comments be civil and relevant. Because the candidates will not be offering opening statements, our hosts will be posting very brief bios of each one of the candidates in the chat, as well as links to candidate websites whenever those were available. In addition to hearing from each candidate in this forum, viewers also will have an opportunity to take part in ranked choice voting, an exercise that will open at the end of this program. This is not a real ballot, but it is a chance for you to rank the candidates in order of preference. This ranked choice voting poll will remain open through Monday at noon, and the current tally will be visible when you vote. Later, there will be a link to the poll posted in the chat. We're going to dive right in with the questions in order to cover as many topics as we can. We've got an hour and a half, so with that being said, let's get started. The first question is about climate action. The climate crisis is the most pressing issue facing our country. What do you say to young people to give them hope for a bright and habitable planet? And What will you commit to today and to them to address the crisis at the scale and pace that this challenge requires? With that, we'll start with Ann Cummings.
Wow. That is a challenging question, partly because Vermont is so small and has such a small footstep. I am committed to doing everything that Vermont can. I've supported the clean heat bills that went through this year. I'm committed to working. I'm also committed to getting the public funding necessary. If we're going to really do this, we're going to have to invest and help moderate income people, not just low income people, do the kind of weatherization and switching over to their to different fuels. My committee regulates utilities. I think we need to invest some money in order to upgrade our grid to so that we can get more renewable energy back out onto the market. And I think we need to do more to promote renewable energy. We're always struggling between the balance of producing more and at the same time keeping the price of electricity, which is our really almost only alternative now, keeping it affordable so that we don't repeat the problems of the past where we had all kinds of electric heat in homes and then it got so expensive, people switched back to either fuel oil or natural gas.
See, I didn't unmute myself. Thank you very much, Ann. Jared, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you to Vermont Conservation Voters and VPIRG and fellow candidates. It's great to be with you all tonight. What I would say in response to young folks and anybody who is concerned about the climate crisis is I am with you, and I have been with you for the last 20 years. This has been my life's work. I began as a student organizer, community organizer, climate organizer at the age of 16 before I could vote because I knew how important this issue was to our future. Today, you know, I work on this every day. It's the first thing I think about in the morning and the last thing I think about at night is how do we meet our moral responsibility to boldly do our part here in Vermont, an example that I think can ripple beyond our borders to confront the moral urgency, the scientific necessity of confronting the climate crisis, and not just confronting it, but doing so in a way that advances an equitable transition off of fossil fuels so that we're saving lower and middle income Vermonters energy and that the clean energy economy we build is one that is much better for Vermonters and Vermont families than the fossil fuel economy we need to be moving beyond. I should also say that I am a very active member, leading member of the Vermont Climate Council, and have been proud to earn the endorsement of environmental and climate leaders like Bill McKibben. But I see my time is up, so I will stop there.
Thank you. Jeremy.
Thanks everybody for showing up. This is a great event. I was really looking forward to having a meeting like this with this format where we can all kind of weigh in and talk about these issues. What I would say to young people, you know, what I say to my two kids, you know, as they're going to middle school and high school, what I say to my college students, if you can, show up. This is a scary time. We are at this inflection point on a number of different issues, and we need everybody to show up if you have the ability. You know, sometimes politicians don't listen, and I really give a lot of credit to organizations like Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for the Future, highlighting those failures of government. So making sure that folks continue to have a voice, keep showing up. I think that's really important. I think what I will commit to is looking at this as a structural issue. I think some of the incremental changes that we've talked about and some of the incremental changes that are being looked at in Vermont and elsewhere in the world are good. We definitely need those. But I think we also need to look at the structural changes to fix the situation that we find ourselves in with this, with the climate crisis. So, being able to say things like carbon tax. The word carbon tax doesn't show up in Vermont's, climate action plan, doesn't occur once. Making sure we look seriously at land conservation and telecommuting, for example. My time is up, so I will shut up now.
Thank you, Jeremy. Andrew.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Times Argus, for being involved in this. Our local paper is a very important part of our democracy. And thanks to VPIRG and Conservation Voters for doing this. Thanks for the candidates. It is great to have more candidates. A lot of other races that are campaigns out there don't have anybody in the primary. So it's good for a Washington district that we have choices. And so thanks for all the candidates for being involved. What I'd say to young folks that are worried about the future is that we have the answers. We know what to do to solve the climate crisis. We just have to have the political will and the pressure from the populace to make sure that the government does it. And we've had renewable energy resources. Today I have my background of the Smith-Putnam turbine that was up on Grandpa's Knob in Vermont in the early 1940s. So we've had these renewable energy technologies for a long time. We have now got them where they're the cheapest form of electricity and energy. So we just need to bring them up to scale. And so there's hope because we have the solutions. And so what I would promise to do, I would promise to push the Green New Deal, to change our renewable energy standard to 100%, to have no fossil fuel infrastructure, to pass the clean heat standard, and to fully transition our transportation infrastructure to electric infrastructure, as well as increasing our public transportation and our micro or on-demand transportation. That's for me.
Thank you, Andrew. Ann Watson.
Hi, thank you. Thanks to VPIRG as well as Vermont Conservation Voters for hosting this. The climate crisis emergency really is why I'm running. It is also the driving factor for me in running for state senate. As the mayor of Montpelier, it's been a focus for me. I was a champion for the city's net zero energy goal, and we've been able to reduce the amount of energy that the municipality has used, and we're up to 40% renewable sources for the city, but that is not enough. And we need to be doing more, not just for the city, but for the state and for Washington County. One of the reasons that I have hope, and one of the things I tell students is that, we have tackled crises like this, similar to this in the past with chlorofluorocarbons in passing the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. We have, as Senator Perchlik said, we do know what to do. We know what needs to be done, and we just need to do it. So I am willing to commit to lifting the cap on the 500 kilowatts for solar for any one customer. And looking towards helping renters, particularly transition, ideally without needing to increase rents through deferred loans, etc.
Great, thank you very much. Well, we promised a lively discussion. We're getting one. Second question, as Vermont moves to electrify everything, what specific policies would you support what specific policies would you support to bring more in-state renewable energy to Vermont, including would you commit to supporting requiring electric utilities to use only renewable energy by 2030 and requiring far more renewables like wind farms and solar arrays to be built than is required today, especially here in Vermont? Jared, you get to go first on this one.
Thanks, Steve. And I want to start by answering the second part of the last question that I didn't get to, which is what do I commit to? And I think the most important thing that the legislature can do and that we could do as state senators is to really advance implementation of the climate action plan that was produced by the Vermont Climate Council. That includes passing the clean heat standard. It includes making sure that we can weatherize the homes of low and moderate income Vermonters, across the board to lower energy costs, reduce pollution, improve health, and help reinvest in the Vermont economy. I'm also a big supporter of the Vermont Green New Deal, and would seek to either, if it's not reintroduced by someone else, I would defer to Senator Perchlik as the senior person who has led on that issue, but would certainly co-sponsor that legislation. In terms of where we go with electricity, we need to move to 100% either renewable or carbon-free electricity standard. That was a recommendation of the Climate Council. But we also need to make sure that we do so in a way that is reducing pollution and reducing costs as effectively as possible, which means balancing in and out of state generation. And it means investing not just in how we generate electricity, but in helping people move to electric transportation and heating options, as well as some other options like weatherization and renewable heating.
Thank you, Jared. Jeremy.
So the good news is that we have an electric utility in Washington County that actually has 100% renewable energy. That's Washington Electric Co-op. But on the other hand, not all of that renewable energy is generated in Vermont. So I think we can still look at a future where we can have more solar, more wind fed into the grid, even with Washington Electric Co-op, and looking at modern systems for smart grids like demand response, which you can only have when you have a reasonable broadband access to all meters on the grid. That's something that CV Fiber, the organization that I founded, is working actively with WEC so that we can have fiber to every subscriber. And then we can know when you have a power wall or when you're doing local generation so that you can balance out the production, the generation, the consumption in a smart way, and we can handle the additional load that things like electric cars are going to put on the grid. We should also be looking at some of the rooftops for state buildings, putting solar on those. I'm surprised that we don't have more buildings that are state buildings that have solar on them. I like the idea that Berlin, Germany introduced that I think goes into effect next year or the year after, that's requiring solar covering a certain percentage of the rooftop for all new construction. If you're building a house, adding a bit more to the cost with adding solar, drives down the price of living there over the long term.
Thank you very much. Andrew.
Thank you. Yes, definitely 100% renewable energy requirement is what we should move to for the utilities that we have. And the utilities are on board with that. Where we need to make sure that we have progress is on how the utilities meet that requirement. Right now, they're meeting it with renewable energy credits from out of state for a large part of that. We need to reform the way the RECs or these renewable energy credits are bought and sold and how they are used to meet the requirements that we have. We do want more renewable energy from Vermont, and wind power is going to needs to be a big part of that. We can do a lot more solar, but if we really want to get to 100%, wind that's sited here in Vermont, I think is really important. And the state has taken an anti-wind stance since Governor Scott has been elected, and I don't agree with that. I think there are sites in the state where we can have wind power, and I think that's really critical. We can get contracts for the offshore wind power that's going to be coming online in the next 10 years, but to be responsible and have it at a low cost and support the local economy, I think small, large scale, but small wind farms would be important for Vermont's energy future.
Great, thank you. Ann Watson.
Yes, I also agree. We need to move towards 100% renewable energy for the electric utilities. And then three things come to mind in terms of supporting that transition. One is to make wind turbines more realistic across the state. We need to update our transmission lines so that the electricity that they're generating can get to the populations where that electricity can be most effectively used. Another thing is as we transition our transportation to EVs, to mass transit, ideally that is electrified mass transit, we are going to need a lot of storage. And to balance that storage, it would be ideal if we were charging during the day, which means supporting charging stations at places of work, so that people can be charging their cars during the day, which minimizes the need for storage. Now, one of the things that I'm worried about with storage is with the power wall, that the burden of storage is going to be distributed to individuals, and so will inherently be inequitable. And so I would love to see utilities also take on storage so that it's an equitable storage transition as well.
Great, thank you. Ann Cummings. Senator, you need to unmute. There you go.
Muted. There I am. Okay. One of the problems with being around for a while is you know too much. I most certainly support going to require utilities, and my committee that I've chaired for quite some time regulates utilities to go into 100% renewable. The question is, do we consider hydro as renewable? That's debatable from different people. And we are, again, we shut down the wind we have because we can't get the electricity out. We need, and the cost of fixing that transmission issue is all ours. So we need to come up with the money to get what we have out. When you get to wind and solar, you get to questions of environmental justice. There's been a lot of complaint from the folks that have the solar, that they have the solar, they have to listen to the noise and put up with the inconvenience, but the bulk of the electricity is going elsewhere. Chittenden County is sometimes named. And so we're going to have to find a way to make sure that that is equitably distributed, and that if there's visual impact or noise impact, we all share in it. And time is up.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm glad you brought up justice. That's one of the questions. Vermont and our country are facing compounding interconnected issues that make a healthy environment out of reach for just too many. What are your top priorities for dismantling systemic racism and addressing environmental injustice? And we're going to start with Jeremy on this one.
Sure. So systemic racism is something that, again, another structural issue that we need to tackle. We need to, again, it's something that would have been great to have tackled this in the past, but kicking the can down the road and not looking at these structural issues. I think one of the things that the legislature could do is include racial justice statements, analyses of how bills and policies would disproportionately affect certain marginalized populations, and have an affirmative acknowledgement that that's the case before bills are adopted. You know, we expect fiscal notes of on basically all bills so that we understand the cost of these things. So when we have, you know, disproportionate effect on marginalized populations, I think, again, we need to acknowledge that. In terms of equity and climate justice and climate equity, I think we need to look at changing the tax structure for education funding, for property taxes. We need to look at the funding, you know, agricultural enterprises for BIPOC folks. I know there was a bill introduced in the last session that didn't go anywhere, but I would like to see it continue.
Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing that we need to do is do some more education on just that there is systematic racism and systematic discrimination that is holding us back as a state and as communities. I think there are still people in Vermont that don't believe it exists. And I think we need to make sure that it's ingrained in everything that we do, and so that it's clearly a problem that we need to solve and all work together and make it part of everything that we do. Similar to what Jeremy said about doing analysis on bills. We have those tools. So we have a social equity screening that the Climate Council put forward. Also within the Scott administration, they do have now an equity analysis that you're supposed to do. All state government is supposed to be running any new program through these equity screenings to make sure that programs are being developed with this systematic racism that has been baked in isn't further enforced in our new programs. I think the environmental justice bill that we passed last year is a good start, but we need to make sure that it's implemented correctly, and that anytime that we're building anything, so it's around siting, like Senator Cummings said, whether it be renewable energy or a road or anything, we need to do that. But also how the state does incentives, we need to make sure that it's equitable in a way that's conscious of the historical discrimination.
Thank you. Ann Watson.
Great, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I'm very interested in is how we transition, particularly the renting population, off of fossil fuels. I'm actually really worried for folks this coming winter with the price of oil as it is right now, particularly for renters that are paying for heat. Their landlord may not have the incentive to do weatherization or fuel switching, so they may be stuck paying high prices for oil. And so we know renters in particular are often a vulnerable, financially vulnerable population. And so we need to be figuring out tools. I mean, if we're going to be realistic about the Global Warming Solutions Act and reaching our goals, we need to be addressing the plight of renters. That at least in I can speak for the city of Montpelier that we have about 40% of our housing stock are rentals, and so much of our housing in Vermont is old and needs to be weatherized, needs to be refurbished to be meeting our climate goals. And so I know the legislature put money towards weatherization last year, and I'm very interested in seeing that continue. And yeah, so I guess I'll leave it there with a little extra time.
Thank you. Ann Cummings.
Okay, when you talk about systemic racism, we've got two things going on. You're really talking about changing people's attitude and perception. And I think a lot of, people get defensive if you tell them they're biased because they don't think they are. So part of it is being able to have that conversation and then take that to the level where we look at our systems and we say, okay, who is hurt? Who is affected by this? We don't have a large BIPOC population in the state. It's growing. It's grown significantly, which is a good thing. But we have a huge underbelly of white Vermonters, poor Vermonters, who have been systemically biased against in many of the things we do. All the stories about school boards paying the mother with the 3 kids to move to the next town are true. I mean, that's been traditional. So I think we have to start with a conversation. I think we have to make it non-threatening. I mean, human beings are human beings, and there's an inherent part there that says you have bias, you have prejudice, but until you're aware of that, then you can't deal with it. You can't do anything about it. And I think that's the first place to start.
Thank you. Jared.
Thanks, Steve. I think the reason why confronting systemic racism is so important is because it's not just individual attitudes and behaviors. It is generational. We have seen this with, nationally with redlining and just who has had access and who has not had access to state and federal government programs. And that leaves a legacy that needs to be overcome. And so the question is, it comes back to who benefits and who pays. And in order to fully understand who's benefiting and who's paying the cost of pollution in different communities, for instance, we need to collect the data. So this is why I was a very strong supporter on the Climate Council of advancing the environmental justice bill. I agree with Senator Perchlik that we need to implement it and make sure that it's funded so that we know where there are disparities by race, by geography, by income. And these environmental justice and equity commitments are really important to me at a personal level. I grew up in a lower income family, moving apartment to apartment, unweatherized apartments, where we really felt the very high cost of being dependent on high cost and price volatile fuels like fossil fuel, like fuel oil and propane. We need to make sure that this is a just transition where lower and middle income Vermonters who've paid the most, who've had the largest energy burdens, come out ahead, and that the folks who've done the most to create the problem, especially fossil fuel companies, and who have the most ability to pay, upper income and wealthy Vermonters, are funding the vast bulk of this transition.
Great, thank you very much. Our next question focuses on clean water. Whether it's the health of surface waters like Lake Champlain or the safety of our drinking water, we all know that clean water is essential. What do you think are the most pressing water-related issues that we face? And if elected, what actions would you take to ensure access to clean water for all? And we'll start with you, Andrew.
Yeah, I think that one thing that comes to mind first is that we need to switch some of the water regulations for agricultural to the Agency of Natural Resources, where we have all our water experts and are working collaboratively across the state with businesses and towns to make sure that our waters are clean and that we're not adding more phosphorus to the rivers and our lakes. And I think because one of the biggest contributors to that is our agricultural industry, we need to make sure that we are making progress there, because even though our agricultural industry is essential to Vermont and we need to be growing our ag industry, we need to make sure that we don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg, which I think is our clean environment in Vermont. And I think clean water is essential to that. So that's one thing that comes to mind. I think we came up for many years, we didn't have the funding to implement the Clean Water Plan. We drafted a good Clean Water Plan. It's similar to the Climate Action Plan. We drafted a plan, but didn't have any funding tied to it. But then thanks to the senators before I got there, they did implement the funding for it. And we are spending millions and millions of dollars to change the way we build roads, the way we have parking lots, the way we're dealing with our sewage treatment plants. But it is a lot of money, and it's a problem that took a long time to be created to where it is. It's going to take us a while to get back to where it should be, but we're on the right path.
Thank you. Ann Watson.
Yeah, I am very particularly concerned about PFAS, this emerging contaminant that we're seeing really everywhere. I mean, it's particularly in leachate, but it's also in our food and in our everyday products, shampoos and whatnot. And it's toxic at very low levels. And I was glad to see that the legislature did pass some restrictions on PFAS last session. But I think we need to be doing more, and particularly we need to, so Vermont is kind of on the cutting edge of this and addressing it, which I think is good for better or worse. But I would love to see us work on how we can destroy PFAS, whether that's through pyrolysis or some kind of gasification, because this is a chemical that doesn't break down on its own just naturally, and so it needs to be treated and taken out of our water supply and out of the environment in general, because it will bioaccumulate. So that's a high priority for me, as well as protecting surface waters that are drinking water sources, protecting those headwaters to make sure that folks have clean, safe water to drink. And then, I agree, looking at the phosphorus runoff particularly from farms who I know are doing their best. And so we need to support them in that limitation.
Thank you. Ann Cummings.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna crow a little bit here. I served on health and welfare, and we have several years running banned different forms of PFAS in different forms of consumer products. We've spent a lot of time looking at the effect on firefighters and flame retardants. And so we've started there. We seem to move further every day, but it takes a while to get things out of the system. It was also the finance committee that found the funding source for clean water. So, and that was right down to the last week in the session. So we've done a few things. We need to continue doing that. The phosphorus in the lake is a major issue, and agriculture is a major contributor. But I take what I know from my late daughter, Erica, who worked for the Extension Service and then for the Department of Agriculture for the state. And her explanation, she was a scientist, is we've been putting phosphorus into Lake Champlain for generations, and it's bonded down there with solid material. And as that solid material breaks up, the phosphorus gets released. So if we stopped all phosphorus now, we would, for another generation or more, be seeing phosphorus being put into the lake. And that's a problem. And we're going to have to deal with that.
Great, thank you. Jared?
I agree with much of what has been said. I just at the most basic level, Vermonters need to be able to trust that when they turn on the faucet, that what they are drinking is going to be clean and healthy, and that they don't have to worry about PFAS or about carcinogens. So this has come up much more in Southern Vermont than it is here. But I think one of the things that's really important is that as a state senator, it's not just about, it's incredibly important that we represent our local constituents and the concerns of Washington County, Stowe, Orange, and Braintree. But we're crafting policy on behalf of the entire state. And we need to be aware of and committed to standing in solidarity with people in other areas of the state where they're, to get back to the previous question about environmental injustice, where there may be more localized pollution. I think PFAS is an example of that. I also agree that, this is very much about human health. It's also about preserving and protecting the Vermont we love and that others love. What makes Vermont, what makes our economy thrive in the best way is the quality of our environment and the quality of life that enables for people who live here and for tourists who come here. The last thing I would say, to try to add something new as well, is that this is really connected to the importance of smart growth and making sure that we do not have kind of runaway development that leads to erosion that further degrades water quality. I see I'm at time. I hope to say more about that later. Thank you.
Don't worry, you will. Jeremy?
So in order to get clean water, you have to have water in the first place. So we sometimes are at risk of drought because of climate change. So water quality is directly related to, and in some cases, a symptom of climate change. So I think tackling that, or helping to tackle that, will go a certain amount to helping with water quality. I agree with Senator Perchlik about looking at agricultural runoff and us assigning that responsibility to the Agency of Natural Resources. I think that makes sense. I think incentivizing organic and regenerative practices in agriculture can also go some way towards reducing the amount of agricultural runoff. But looking at other smaller things, maybe not smaller, but things that could contribute to improving water quality, looking at community wastewater systems. So that also leads into solutions with housing. But looking at polluter responsibility. So the PFAS bill that was passed, that's great. Looking at microplastics, we're finding those everywhere now too. And I think looking for ways of going towards less plastic in general, cradle to cradle responsibility for producers of products. And so we have the plastic bag ban. Great start. We can keep going and start looking at ways of making sure that we don't consume so much plastic as we do right now.
Well, let's stay on that topic. As you've noted, our planet's being flooded with plastic products, which are primarily derived from fossil fuels and result in pollution of our waters and land, and can harm wildlife and our human health. So what specific policies do you support to significantly reduce the use of plastic products, particularly single-use products? And we're going to start with Ann Watson.
Yeah, so I just want to mention that Montpelier is one of the communities that passed a plastic bag ban as a charter amendment, which I would like to believe helped encourage the state to go the route of banning plastic bags statewide, which was encouraging, but obviously not enough. So one of the things that I am also very interested in is looking at alternatives to plastic for packaging. We know that there are some good alternatives out there, either compostable forms of plastic or mushroom-based packaging, that kind of thing. There are things that we can do that do not involve plastics, particularly for packaging. So that's one thing I'd like to look at, as well as I'm certainly about modernizing the bottle bill. That feels overdue and obvious to me. Other states have done it. They've had success with it. We need to do it. I'd also like to look at plastic foodware. It seems unconscionable to me that something that has a half an hour useful life would spend basically an eternity in a landfill. That just makes no sense. And so I think we really need to look at alternatives for plastic foodware. And California has done some great work with limiting disposable hotel toiletries. And so I think we can do something with that as well.
Great, thank you. Ann Cummings.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Vermont actually did pass a bill on disposable hotel toiletries. It doesn't go into effect it went out like the first year of COVID. So there was a delay on implementation, but that did go through my committee. That's out. We did ban plastic bags. We banned PFOAs or PFAs in food wrapping in the state this year. I think it's going to be an incremental thing because we really, we're in a national market and we're a very small part of it. And so we don't really have the ability to tell a major national producer, you can't do this and you're wrapping unless we're willing to do without the product. So it works better if we've done several times with so many states or so many New England states. So there's a big enough market to encourage national, international manufacturers to make the change. And I think those cooperative efforts a lot more productive for us. And I think we did do we got the bottle bill through. It failed on a technicality. We're again running a balance there between getting more things into the bottle bill and at the same time getting enough recyclable material into the solid waste districts so they can keep recycling other things. So again, I think we'll go back and I think we'll do the bottle bill next year. Hopefully.
Great, thank you. Jared? Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks. A big starting point on this for me is it's about human health, right? We were talking about microplastics and accumulation in human bodies. We need to be able to have a long-term view about how do we prevent more of that. I agree that single-use plastics are we need to curtail that. I support moving beyond single-use plastic bags and also other single-use plastics. I think that this is an area where in the past it's important for government to say, here are certain standards that we expect be met and give a timeline for implementation so that businesses can respond. And I also think that I just want to applaud VPIRG for their work. I mean, it was originally the work of VPIRG that led to the passage of the first bottle bill. And I very much agree that we need to modernize the bottle bill to include many more packages. If you're going out and recycling right now, it feels like only half of them are actually returnable and half of the containers you're using. And so I think we could see less plastic pollution in Vermont if there was more of an incentive to return those, beverage containers and cover more of them rather than, seeing them on roadsides and elsewhere. So just want to thank VPIRG for that work alongside others and am very much a supporter of modernizing the bottle bill.
Thank you very much. Jeremy?
So continuing with the bottle bill, I would kind of like to see a German style change to the bottle bill where we look at deposits for single use containers, but also incentivizing the development of multiple use containers. So sometimes if you get your kombucha or beer in a growler, right, that can get washed and reused, or you can get milk in a glass container, you can get washed and reused. In Germany, if you buy beer and some soda, those bottles can be used 3, 4, 5, 6 times before they're eventually properly recycled. But it's the what they call the Einweg, the one way, the single use beverage bottles that have very high deposits, so like 25 cents, whereas the glass reusable bottles are smaller deposits. But they've gotten to a point, Germany has gotten to a point where they have something like a 95% return rate, which all the experts over there say that's basically impossible to go higher than that. It's really not doable. So I think that's an important way to go. But also, as I mentioned before, cradle to cradle manufacturing, expecting that when a producer of some widget puts it in a plastic packaging, that having it be their responsibility for dealing with that plastic packaging. And if they're responsible for that, they are going to try to minimize the expense of reusing, recycling, however we want to do that. I think we need to put the responsibility for that on the producer, not necessarily on the end user. When everybody has plenty of other things to spend their money on, than worrying about dealing with plastic and such.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, I'll continue with what Jeremy was saying, because I think it's important that we make manufacturers responsible for what they sell, because that's what we haven't done. Now, we used to have all those reusable beer bottles and soda bottles in Vermont, and all milk was sold in reusable bottles. But when they had no responsibility for what they produce, and all the responsibility is on the consumer, they all, of course, switched to the cheapest thing they could do. So we definitely need to expand the bottle bill to include all the plastic beverage containers, but we also need to make sure that the manufacturers are held responsible. And I think there's a way to do it both because people don't like to go to the redemption center. In Europe, they have a little different system of the way they do the redemption. And maybe we could do that, but it works better in smaller areas. You know, we don't have a lot of redemption centers left. Montpelier doesn't have one anymore. Like people in this district, some have to drive 45 minutes to go to a place where they can redeem their bottles, and it's not a fun thing. So that's where we need a mix of a better bottle bill and with manufacturer responsibilities. We're making them pay to make sure that that stuff gets recycled, because as the question started out with, we need to make sure that either we don't use it and we switch to multi-use containers that Jeremy was talking about, or we make sure that the manufacturers are paying the money so that they can be recycled.
Great, thank you. We're just pointing out that the bags that the newspaper comes in are wonderful for scooping up dog poop, just to be clear. Next question focuses on smart growth, and very much an issue that came up multiple times during the course of our preparation for this discussion. Housing is a significant and growing challenge in Vermont. The state has become a refuge for many during COVID-19, and we've already begun to see climate migrants move into the state, which is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the state's already tight housing market. We're definitely feeling it here in central Vermont. What specifically would you do to support smart growth housing, which can simultaneously protect our natural resources while also expanding access and availability of affordable housing, which we need here in Vermont? And we'll start with Ann Cummings.
Okay. That gets to be an interesting one, because it's not just at the state level, it's at the local level. Things are regulated by local planning and zoning. And I did the first Montpelier master plan, and I'm sure Mayor Watson has worked on some revisions to that. But it's getting all of those aligned, and there is still NIMBY, not in my backyard. There is one visible example in Montpelier where we have a piece of land that should be by all smart growth standards have housing on it, and it doesn't. And that was in the original master plan, and it got very similar kinds of pushback. So we need to, on many of these issues, have a very frank discussion as the people of the state, that if we want people to move in, to fill the jobs, to spread out the tax burden, to pay for a lot of the services that we would like, these are the trade-offs we're going to have to make. And then sit down and work that through. We have a lot of these where the devil comes out in the details, and the question is, who pays the price? Right now, it's usually the people with the least ability to defend themselves, which usually translates to the people with the least amount of money or power. And we need to do something to turn that around.
Great, thank you. Jared.
Housing is one of the most important issues in the state now. It's connected systemically to so many other challenges that we face. I think that we need to address it both from the supply side and the demand side. So on the supply side, I think we need to do things to further, like Vermont Conservation Voters and VPIRG supported, further incentivize development of housing in our downtowns and village centers to preserve the historic settlement pattern of Vermont, of vibrant downtowns and village centers surrounded by rural countryside. I think that there's also things that can be done around accessible accessory dwelling units, and making sure that we need to have a real sense of urgency around creating more housing, because there is an undersupply. We're producing much less housing per year than we used to be. But we need to make sure that as we do so, it is happening primarily in our downtowns and village centers. and that we are not allowing buildings to go up that embed fossil fuel infrastructure, locking in decades of further fossil fuel pollution and high and volatile costs for the people who will live in those homes or apartments. So we need to do more, but we also need to do it in alignment with smart growth principles and in ways that lead to green building and not further embedding fossil fuel infrastructure.
Jeremy.
So this connects right back into climate change again, like a lot of this stuff does, as has been mentioned before. And when you have housing that is built and that's accessible in downtowns, those places can be walkable. And when you have the ability to walk to the store and you don't have to turn on your car to do that, there's a big win all the way around. It's cheaper and it protects the environment at the same time. So looking at looking at things like land conservation, the 30 by 2030 plan, where we're putting more land into conservation, where we're not doing development in those places based on town plans and based on where we know and where we want land development to happen. So yeah, looking at incentivizing accessory dwelling units. You know, if you have a single family house and there's space and zoning allows for, you know, a small house to be added there, you know, the mother-in-law apartment, whatever you might want to call it. I think that's an easy-ish short-term fix. Looking again, as I mentioned before, community wastewater systems, where if you are in a place where it just doesn't make sense to build 3 houses because you don't have enough room to put 3 different septic systems, having a shared septic system that can be used across the entire community can be a valuable way to increase density without leading to additional, you know, forest fragmentation or sprawl.
Andrew.
Thank you. One thing that I would advocate for, which I've been a supporter of before, is full funding for the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. They get funding through the property transfer tax, which is way up because of the prices of real estate sales, but not all of that is supposed to go to the HCP goes to them. I think they do good work, and they do concentrate not only on getting more housing and getting more affordable housing, but also conserving land. We don't want to, in a rush, kind of in a gold rush kind of sense, to build as much housing as we can, kind of do things that we would regret in the future. So we don't want to say, like, housing is so critical that we're going to not follow our Act 250 permitting, for example. Although I do support making some changes to that for those downtown areas. And I think another way we can do this is so similar to what others have said, is that we support towns and regional planning commissions that are doing their plans and their zoning to make sure their zoning isn't prohibiting things like accessory dwelling units. Or if somebody's going to do a co-housing, I've heard this from some folks trying to do co-housing in Vermont, they're packing more housing in a smaller area, but it runs in other zoning because they didn't write the zoning thinking that anybody would want to put 13 houses all right next to each other. But it's much better for forest fragmentation and other reasons to have them do that than have every 10 acres have their own house. So we need to support the towns to do that. We can't, it's not something we can just force the towns to do. We need to support them.
And Watson.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said already. So just to add a few new ideas here, just thinking about the Act 250 changes that could be made. Specifically, we could be exempting, I would like to see us exempt downtowns from Act 250 if their zoning has sufficient environmental protections, things like stormwater, et cetera. Because going through that process of both Act 250 and local zoning is often duplicative. And so just to make it easier I think would be beneficial. We need to support the rehabilitation of second and third floors in downtowns where those spaces are vacant. And all of this is really to say we need to be building in places that are already impacted, that are already designated downtowns, for example. I would add a couple other ideas into the mix. One is I'm interested in the idea of allowing municipalities to implement something called land-based taxes for their designated downtowns to encourage building in the downtown areas specifically. And then also just again, like the Housing and Conservation Board, I'm very interested in that we're providing folks with opportunity for home ownership. So I'll leave it there.
Now I'm going to go in the other direction. We take great pride in this state in what we call our working landscape. Is that an idea that Vermont can sustain, and can we continue to afford to have the working landscape? I'm going to put that out to Jared first.
Thanks, Steve. This is something that I've been deeply committed to. When I served as Economic Development Director at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, I was working with our farm and forest businesses across the state to help them identify programs that could help, whether it was workforce development or expanding their businesses, which included serving on the Working Lands Enterprise Board. I'm reminded of a quote from Frank Bryan and Melissa Bryan, and they said, "Vermont without farms might be able to be a nice place, but it could never be Vermont." I'm somebody who is deeply rooted here. My family goes back in Vermont 9 generations, in Central Vermont 6 generations. And the working landscape is key to it is so fundamental to our character, our identity. And we need to find ways to continue supporting our farm and forest businesses as we go forward, because it's just so central to what makes Vermont, Vermont. And they do so much to help keep forests as forest, to help feed our communities, to help sequester carbon, to help provide critical habitat. So the answer has to be yes, that the working lands will be protected and supported as part of Vermont's future.
Jeremy, what do you think?
I think I see climate change about this again. You're going to get sick of me saying that, but looking at small scale farms, right? Looking at sugar bush processing facilities, these are things that, elsewhere in the country, we've looked at this in a sort of a capitalistic sort of way, like, let's go big, right? Go big, have, more cattle, bigger herds, do more. And that really fossil fuel intensive, phosphorus running off agricultural systems are not necessarily the Vermont way. So looking at incentivizing and supporting, in particular, small farms, and is it the most quote unquote efficient? Again, in that sort of capitalistic term, maybe not. But on the other hand, people can make a living with small farms. So I think, again, supporting regenerative agriculture, organic practices, supporting the work of organizations like Rural Vermont. I've not really seen policy statements out of Rural Vermont that I've not supported. So there's a lot of ways that we could move in a positive direction for this. Looking back at like the Vermont Milk Company, which founded by Anthony Polina back in the day, having like a Vermont branding. Some of this exists, but I think we have opportunities to do more. In addition, like agritourism. People love to come to Vermont for a lot of reasons, but they like to see the cows, they like to see the farms, and giving them the opportunity to come visit and stay on a farm, I think, is also a valuable part of the agricultural economic portfolio.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think the question was, can we afford to have it? And I would agree with kind of what Jared was saying, is we can't afford not to have it. We need a working landscape in Vermont. We do not want to turn Vermont into a place that doesn't have one. At least I don't, and I would support an effort to basically, pave over Vermont or make it so it doesn't look like Vermont. And I think we have ways that we've tried to do that over the years. Current use is a good program. It does cost money, but I think it's money well spent for the reasons that have already been iterated. And I think there's work that we need to do, though, to support these small working enterprises that are trying to do the small kind of farming, regenerative farming that Jeremy was talking about in both the agricultural and forest products sector, which I think are critical for our carbon storage as well. But we need to support them because, as Jeremy said, the overall economic system isn't really meant to support those businesses. So we have the Working Lands Enterprise Board and Fund, and that's been doing some good work. I think I would support funding, continue to fund that and fund it at higher levels. But the biggest threat to our forests isn't logging or the forest products industry, it's housing. It's people clear cutting it for new development. And that's something in the fragmentation of the forest that even if we have forests, they're not the kind of the ecological condition that we want them to be in. So that's where I would focus my energies.
Ann Watson.
Yeah, I agree. I also support preserving the current use program and supporting our wood and forest products industry. And really, all of our farms need our support. We have to be able to support a Vermont with farms and working landscapes. We need to support our farms in order for them to stay viable. And I'm interested in all the ways that we can do that. I'm particularly interested in the farm to school program. I mean, the universal meals program just passed as an extension this last session. And I see that as an opportunity. The way that school meals works is maybe a little bit surprising to folks as to what happens behind the scenes, but I see it as an opportunity to get more local products into our cafeterias. And I would love to see us extend the Universal School Meals program and also think about it as a way to support our local agriculture. And I guess I have a little extra time. I guess I'd also add that as much as we can help folks transition also to regenerative agriculture, that will certainly help. Thanks.
Great. Ann Cummings.
Okay, I think what you've hit is the proverbial issue or that Vermont has faced. We need to be Vermont, the Vermont we all know. We need to have farms. We need to have forests. We need to have them to combat climate change. We need to do all of these things. And yet when we're talking about clean water, we're talking about asking the farms to invest a lot more money. And we all need to support, but support means money. Generally, it means somebody has to buy. The cost for universal school meals is going on the property tax unless something changes, but that's where it is now. And so we always have this tension between wanting the best Vermont we can have and supporting it, and yet having it be a state in which people can afford to live. And that is, if people can't afford to live here, and we've become Vermont, East, we've become a theme park, and I don't know where the state's getting the money to support everybody, but we need to have a viable economy that allows farmers to pay their taxes, to send their kids to school. Or as one farmer said when I was the mayor in Montpelier, well, you guys all like looking out at my farm, but I'd like to be able to retire and go to Florida just like you. and you're keeping me from doing that. That's the balance. And I think that's the challenge.
Great, thank you. Next question is about democracy. It's facing new threats, feels like every day. In some ways, Vermont's been a leader, such as making it easier for people to vote, but we still have a lot that can be done to improve that process. Two examples are ranked choice voting for certain statewide elections and banning corporate campaign contributions to candidates, much as 22 other states have already done. Do you support those ideas? And are there other ideas that you have to make our democracy stronger? And we'll start with Jeremy.
So the Citizens United decision was probably one of the main watershed moments of my political awakening, and sort of the decision that people need to stand up and need to push back against this. So yes, in the previous times I've run for office, and this time too, I've always made it front and center that I will not accept corporate campaign contributions nor corporate PAC contributions. These are things that I want to be able to represent people, in Washington County, in Vermont, and corporations outside are doing this for their own interests. So yes, I think banning corporate contributions that's easy. Ranked choice voting and other election systems, this is a field that I do academic research in, and I'm very familiar with it. I would sponsor, lead, and I can show you the data about how ranked choice voting is objectively better, and mathematically objectively better. And there's other systems out there too that we can talk about, but looking at the voting systems that we have right now are being sort of bottom of the barrel. So yeah, ranked choice voting is much better. Looking at robust auditing systems, so that when we have any sort of allegations of impropriety, or if something did legitimately go wrong in computer systems, that we can know that the outcome is correct using robust, secure practices. These are well-known techniques called risk limiting audits. We can definitely improve in that direction. And also mailing all ballots to folks, giving folks the ability to have to submit absentee ballots for every election.
Great. Andrew?
Just to follow up on that, I do support mail-in ballots for the general election. I don't think it's what we should do for the primary if we're going to require all parties to have an open primary. I would be supporting of allowing other parties not to do the open primary if they run their own election and it's overseen by the Secretary of State. There's issues with mailing every primary voter all three ballots for the three parties, and I want to have more parties. I think our democracy is in danger nationwide, and Vermont needs to lead, as we have done on other issues, on really a more vibrant democracy. When we have one party that's basically has decided that democracy is not something that they could support, we can't really support a two-party system. So ranked choice voting is essential to have more parties. And I think this is going to be something that Republicans that are not supportive of the current trajectory of the Republican Party will support. Ranked choice voting has supported Republicans in Republican states. Here they see it as a threat. But I think as they see the National Republican Party as a threat to democracy, we really need ranked choice voting to be implemented. It's going to be difficult to have it for everything, but we need to start with the primary, the presidential primary, and the congressional elections is where I think we should start with that. And I do support having no contributions from corporations. I don't accept them. I think that we should make that the law. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian Watson?
Yes, I also agree. We need ranked choice voting. I think it makes sense. And I'm really excited that there's the opportunity to have ranked choice voting in this venue. I think that's great for folks to get an experience with that. Because hopefully it's coming. Hopefully it's something that, this is a practice run for something that folks may do in the future. And I also agree with banning campaign contributions from corporations. That I also do not take corporate campaign contributions. And just in terms of other ideas to make democracy stronger, I support universal mail-in voting or voting by mail. And I would just highlight that the city of Montpelier had some issues with that in town meeting day because not all of the communities that had items on the ballot agreed to do a mail-in ballot or a mailed ballot. So what that meant was that Montpelier, even though we wanted to, we couldn't do it. So anyway, that it would be great if it was across the board. And then Montpelier is also one of the leaders in legal non-citizen voting. We're proving in Montpelier that it can be done, and it's safe and it works. And I would love to see that go statewide, because it's really fundamentally about who is a part of the local decision-making process. And I'm really proud of us for doing that.
Ian Cummings.
Okay. Banning corporate contributions. I actually thought the Senate had voted to do that. I don't know if it made it all the way through, but it's more of a feel-good thing because the Supreme Court says they can set up a PAC and they can do it. So it's symbolic. Ranked choice voting, I think, is interesting. I'm really watching Maine, who has initiated it on a statewide level. I'd like to see how it works out there. I'm a little hesitant at this point with all the concern about fake ballots and, the integrity of our election system to throw in a whole new system. I think it's something we're starting. Burlington is doing it. They did it once before and dropped it. So I'm watching what they did, and I think that's something we'll work up to. I think that the threat to democracy is probably the biggest threat. It's why I run, because I do believe in representative democratic government. And this is the first time I felt it was really at risk. The thing I think is most important is that people feel that they are heard. We're all kind of agreeing on most of the basic issues, but believe it or not, there's a whole bunch of people out there that don't agree. And the ability to let those people feel that their concerns are legitimate, and many of them are, maybe some of them are, when you get down and talk to them aren't real, but they need to feel heard. And I think that's what Vermont really needs to focus on, is being that really hands-on government.
Thank you very much. Our clock vanished.
Yep.
So,
Do I have time left?
No, I'm cutting you off. You're all set. It could make it a little bit of a challenge here at the end. I might have to actually look at a watch. So folks, we have about 10 minutes left. I had one final question before we did closing statements. Are you okay with going over a little bit?
Steve, is it all right if I answer that question as well, the previous question?
Oh, I didn't. I'm sorry, Jared. Go ahead.
Yes,
That's
okay.
Course.
Thank you.
Rattle
I
my
got so
I
freaked
just
out
wanted-
about the clock. I didn't know what else to do. Go ahead.
No, this is such an important issue. I mean, every time that we open the newspaper these days, it's clear that our democracy is under threat. Following the hearings about the attack on democracy on January 6th. And this is another area where Vermont has been and needs to continue to be a brave little state. I'm so thankful for the leadership of our Secretary of State that we have great candidates who are stepping up and really committed to providing that leadership going forward. We're really fortunate about that. I very much support ranked choice voting. I think it's important. It's more reflective of the will of the voting public, and it allows to make sure that we don't have a spoiler effect, and that when you have multiple candidates in a race, you can't have somebody winning with plurality support. We need to know that it's majority support, and ranked choice voting helps do that. I also do not accept corporate contributions or corporate PAC contributions. I'm really proud of the fact that if you, in the latest campaign finance filing, our campaign for state senate had the most small donors of any state senate campaign in Vermont. And none of those were corporate or corporate PACs, and I would support a ban on that. To go further, one of the things that really concerns me is that we are often teaching young people who are 16, 17 years old about civics. They are some of the most concerned or informed people about this country's future, about the importance of the climate crisis. I think what Brattleboro did in terms of lowering the voting age to 16 and 17 years old was important. I think that we should do that elsewhere in Vermont to provide young people who are informed and who have the most at stake in terms of the outcome of our elections more of a say in our democratic process.
Thank you. And I apologize for that. I wasn't trying to cut you out. How do folks feel about one more question before closing statements? You okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, great. The audience just is going to have to suffer through. So organizations like the sponsors of this event are just two of the many activist groups that encourage supporters to contact elected leaders by email, phone, text, about an idea, about a piece of legislation. As senator, would you welcome and encourage this kind of communication from your constituents? And how would you plan to keep constituents updated and engaged in the legislative process? In other words, describe your approach to constituent engagement. So, and we're going to start with Andrew on that one.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I definitely support that. I think it's critical for citizens to feel that there's a reason to be engaged. And I think that's the important thing. I think you can, or we can as legislators, push out a bunch of information and some people will be interested and look at it, but we need to give them a reason to care and that they feel like if they're in touch with you, that it can make a difference. And I think different legislators, do different things. Some legislators, would rather get text, or rather do by emails or get phone calls. I give out my phone number. Not all legislators do that. I'm happy to take phone calls from constituents. But mainly it's through emails. But I think the legislature as a whole did a really great job because of COVID. They had resisted to it beforehand, partly the money, partly just didn't know how it was going to work. But COVID forced our hand to have cameras and recording in every committee room. So now it's a lot easier for citizens to know what's going on and to see how their elected representatives are acting and what kind of questions they're asking. So I really encourage people, and I would send out links to hearings and say, yeah, we talked about that. Check this out on this, go to the YouTube page on, 2 minutes, 22 seconds in, there's a good discussion on that. And I think that's been really helpful for citizens to see their legislators actually in action. And that helps them to understand better what questions to ask and how they can influence the process.
Great, thank you. Ian Watson.
Yeah, so multiple ways of getting in touch. I am all about folks staying in touch with me and me being able to hear from folks. So one of those ways is through a newsletter. I, as a part of this campaign, have put together a newsletter, and we'll continue that practice to hopefully keep folks up to date as to what's happening. And in addition, I have a bit of experience with this too, as being mayor, getting back to constituents and holding office hours. And I think that's actually been really useful for folks. So I would love to continue to host office hours, so that folks could either come in person or virtually to be able to just talk about whatever issues are of concern to them. So that's a high priority for me, because it's important that we as senators are representing the issues and topics that are priorities for the folks in Washington County, Stowe, Orange, and Braintree. So I would add, folks are welcome to get in touch by phone or by email. But all the socials as well, you know, Twitter, Instagram, etc. Those are all welcome.
Careful what you wish for. Ann Cummings.
I was going to say, careful what you wish for. Those of us that have been around for a while know that we frequently work 12-hour days and get well over 100 emails a day. And it is a challenge. I often feel that I don't, you know, I get a day or two behind in my emails, but I do answer every one of them. Occasionally I may miss one, but I do try and answer. If I don't agree or have some conditions or have some thoughts on an issue, I'll just write that, you know, I'll write that back and encourage people to continue the conversation or ask them for thoughts so that it's more of a dialogue. I will say I respond better. I like hearing from citizens, but when you get 100 of the same email, I will admit I do cut and paste an answer because it's the only way you can get through 100 emails that come in, usually within 15 minutes. I think the one that caught my attention was asking me to not support banning habeas corpus in New York City. Somebody pushed, you know, I had to explain to folks I had no control over New York City. But you just push the send button. So I really like personal emails with personal thoughts. I do respond to all of them. Prior to COVID, I was out and about, you know, just trying to be there, trying to just keep your pulse on the community and what issues are going on. I read almost all the front porch forums in the county. And now I've got to get Stowe. But just trying to stay in touch.
Great, thank you. Jared?
I think the responsibility is really twofold. It's both to share information and to listen carefully, intently, and then to respond. So on the sharing information, I think that that's definitely during the session. So there's things move so fast and constituents want to know what bills are moving, what are the debates. But I think it's also kind of outside of the session as well, because oftentimes the Senate, the legislature will pass bills that fund programs that we need to make sure Washington County, Stowe, Orange, and Braintree residents know about so they can take advantage of it. But it's also listening during the legislative session and outside of it to have policy ideas, identify, you know, folks who would be really compelling witnesses in committee testimony, and to inform what we might introduce or co-sponsor in terms of legislation. So one of the things that I did at my campaign launch on the State House lawn was, which if folks are interested in the video of that, it's at my campaign website, but was to commit to holding a listening session in every single one of our districts, towns, and cities. So 23 total over the course of the biennium. I don't want to just be available over email. I want to go to each and every town and make sure that I am available and meeting with people and listening in your town or city. And I commit to doing that as one of your state senators. So.
Great, thank you. Jeremy?
So I'm a real big fan of horizontal democracy. And so, you know, this race isn't really about me, it's about the constituents. And there's a great saying that came out of, you know, disability rights activism called it's nothing about us without us. So I think it's really important to have those discussions with everybody and, you know, bring everybody into the process at, you know, in the ways that they want to engage. So so while I was on the select board, I was also keeping an eye on the legislature. So I would write sometimes, you know, brief bill summaries so people knew what was happening. And I also scheduled, you know, office hours where you could sit down and have coffee, you know, certain mornings. And that was interesting. Not everybody liked to engage that way, though. And so I think there are some other, you know, technological tools we can look at. There is a tool called Consider It. I just put it into the chat. That was built by a friend of mine, and I remember piloting it many years ago, where we can take some of the issues with repetitive emails or people with, you know, common pros and cons about issues, and you can synthesize that into one place that's easy to deal with. It's a really useful tool in my opinion. And also, if I might, look more towards technology that's used largely by younger folks. So Twitch is a wonderful tool for people to broadcast the video games that they're playing, but it can also be used in terms of office hours and be able to have people engage in something like this, but on a platform that's much more accessible to younger folks who might not want to join via Zoom by something like this.
Great, thank you very much. Very interesting. So we're going to hop right into closing statements. Sticking with the same format, we're going to just continue with where we are in the rotation. So Ann Watson, you get to go first.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm Ann Watson, and I am asking for your vote for State Senate to represent Washington County, Stowe, Orange, and Braintree. And I'm running because every day I work with high school kids that are worried about climate change. So I teach high school physics and engineering and math at Montpelier High School, where I've been for the past 17 years. Especially in teaching physics, I think about a lot about Vermont's energy systems, and I'm passionate about decarbonizing Vermont's economy. In that transition, it matters that we center historically excluded populations along with those who are generally without means, because they are often the hardest hit by the effects of climate change, and they have the fewest resources to be able to transition away from fossil fuels. As the mayor, I frequently hear from folks about how Vermont's economic policies are just not working for them. This includes the lack of high quality, affordable childcare, the lack of paid family and medical leave, and the lack of affordable housing. So I, as mayor, have been working on these issues, and we've been able to make progress in small ways, but I need the support of the state to make progress on a larger scale. So I have experience crafting policy. I'm a coach, a teacher, a union member, and a mom, and I hope that I can count on your vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Ann Cummings.
Okay. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, and I know the most important thing that we're dealing with is the world we leave our children. And I think we all agree that climate change and racial justice and equity and all kind, we didn't even talk about healthcare tonight. Affordable healthcare and preserving our environment and housing are all vital issues, and we have to do something. The question is what, and that's where things get difficult. We're also dealing in a time in which people's faith in government, their faith in democracy, and their willingness to just throw it all out has never been so intense. And so I think what I'm asking the voters to return me to Montpelier to do is to work out those details. That's what I like to do. That's what I think I'm good at, to bring people together, to talk about their differences, to say, okay, this is our common goal. None of us really want to see the earth blow up or, have the climate be 125 in downtown Montpelier all July and have no snow. So how do we get there? What's your concern? What's your concern? The best piece of political advice I ever got was my first day on the city council in Montpelier, and the then city manager had me into his office. And he said, you're going to hear a lot of things from a lot of people. He said, I've found in my time that there's truth in all of them, and your job will be to hear the truth. And that's what I try and do. And I think that's the skill I bring to this job. So thank you. Thank you, VPIRG. And I ask for everyone's vote.
Great, thank you. Jared?
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, VPIRG, Vermont Conservation voters, fellow candidates, and all the voters who've joined us. Over the past 20 years, my life's work has been about building a greener and more equitable economy. I've been dedicated to this work not just at a local level, but also at the statewide level as a co-author of Vermont's Climate Action Plan, a leading member of the Vermont Climate Council, and a frequent witness in the state Senate. This work is deeply personal to me. I know that the transition beyond fossil fuels can and must be one that lowers energy costs for lower and middle income Vermonters, families like the one that I grew up in. Whether as Vermont's Economic Development Director at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, where I supported green economy businesses, or as Executive Director of the Energy Action Network, my statewide experience has shown me that we can and must advance policies to build both a cleaner and more equitable economy. And we need to do so boldly and with courage. The time is urgent. We can build an economy that simultaneously meets that urgent moral responsibility to do our part in confronting the climate crisis, and that has Vermonters coming out stronger. If you want candidates who you won't just hope will vote the right way on environmental and economic issues, but who you know deep down will be true climate leaders and champions during this critical period, candidates that don't just talk the talk, but that have and will continue walking the walk, well, that has been and will continue to be my life's work. I would be honored to earn your support and one of your up to 3 votes in this election on August 9th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jeremy.
So I'm going to channel my inner Bernie Sanders here, and I'm going to say, let me be clear. This isn't about me. This is about working Vermonters. We have structural issues in Vermont. We have structural issues in the country. And a lot of these revolve around inequality. We've talked about inequality in terms of racial justice. We've talked about inequality in terms of climate justice. We, as has been said before, we basically understand the paths forward. It ends up being political will that gets in the way. Anne's comment about how do we get there? It's progressive taxation. We need to look at corporations, capital gains, and have a more progressive tax code. A little background to me that we didn't get to talk to. So, I created CV Fiber because I saw that there were people who didn't have access to the internet in any sort of, meaningful, fast way. And that got, obviously worse during the pandemic. And we got together with 21 communities, and now we're going to be lighting up our first subscribers in the next few months. That was a community-led effort. I just happened to be the lead cat herder trying to get that across the finish line, and we're nearly there. I also want to mention, the previous office holder, the previous incumbent, Anthony Polina, has endorsed me for this race, and I really take Anthony's legacy seriously and hope that I can be as progressive and as effective as he was. We didn't talk about universal health care, which includes abortion. Abortion is health care, mental health, dental health, vision, hearing. These are all things that are deeply unequal in Vermont and deeply unequal across the country, especially in light of the last couple of weeks and the catastrophic Supreme Court decisions. So I want to help Washington County, Braintree, Orange, and Stowe solve problems, but I don't think that I can do it alone.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you again to Steve, Times Argus, VPIRG, and Conservation Voters for doing this, and for folks tuning in and for the candidates. I'm Andrew Perchlik. I'm asking for one of your 3 votes for State Senate for the new Washington District. And my 3 main issues that I would hope to work on and get your support for is, 1, supporting children and families. That is paid family leave, that's affordable childcare that's accessible, and it's guaranteed outdoor time for children, that we don't leave no child left inside policy. We need to make sure that our children get the outside time and outdoor education that they need to be healthy citizens of our society as they go forward. 2nd, to reduce the fossil fuel use in our state while building a clean energy economy. And 3, strengthening democracy. We've talked about 2 of those quite a bit. And I see my time in the Senate, I've been there 4 years, as a proven record, but also as a continuation of the volunteer and community work that I've done, whether that be as a Peace Corps volunteer, as a Vista volunteer, which was my first job here in Vermont, working with low-income Vermonters trying to secure heating assistance. On the select board in Marshfield, including time as the select board chair, as a volunteer firefighter in Marshfield, and continuing as a state senator for the last 2 terms. And I think I've proven that I can be an effective legislator for not only the citizens of the district, but the citizens of the entire state of Vermont. And thank you again.
Well, and thank you all for taking the time this evening. I think that this has been a wonderful reminder of, one, how great our state is, and 2, what challenges we face. And somebody said early on that it's amazing that we have such a robust crop of candidates for this primary. So I think we've all been able to get to know you all a little bit better and hear your thoughts on the issues, and appreciate that. And so I'll just reintroduce the 5 candidates who are on the ballot for the August 9th Democratic primary. They're Ann Cummings, Jared Duval, Jeremy Hansen, Andrew Perchlik, and Ann Watson. And again, I would like to, on behalf of Vermont Conservation Voters and VPIRG and the Times-Argus, thank everyone for coming out tonight and taking part in this really important moment in local democracy. So thanks so much for joining us,
Thank you.
and have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.